In our first video of our Genesis Bible study, we went over Genesis chapter 1 and God's bold claim that He created the heavens and the earth. We went over a little bit how that claim still stands, despite the evolution of science and archaeology. Now we get to move to a little bit more of the storytelling of the Bible. We get to Genesis chapter 2, which is the most important story in the history of planet Earth. Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished His work that He had done. And He rested on the seventh day from all His work that He had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all His work that He had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth, when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the heavens and the earth. So let's stop here and briefly talk about one thing. In the Genesis chapter 1 video, we went over how proud God is of His creation, and how He's not afraid to make the claim that He created it. Today, it seems more popular to believe that God did not create the heavens and the earth than it is to believe it, but God certainly believed it. Let's look at the first chapters here that we just ran through. Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. 7 different times God takes the claim of creating the heavens and the earth, just in these 4 verses. That just shows you how proud He is of His creation, and how He is not shy of making the claim that He created the heavens and the earth. Now to verse 5. When no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground. And a mist was going up from the land and was watering the whole face of the ground. And the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there He put the man whom He had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, let's take a minute to run through a few things here. First, God breathed His own breath to create us. Doesn't say that for animals. It shows how He places us over the animals in His creation. Humans are the only creatures created by God's own breath. That is why in the very beginning we were very much like Him. There is something different about us, which is made clear in Genesis 1 and 2. Also, Adam was not a child when he was born, showing God has full control over His creation. The second point I'd like to make is that many of you may remember in chapter 1, verse 26, that we already had the formation of man mentioned. This is the second mention of man being created, and with that comes several theories. One is that it's just simply mentioned twice. God mentions it very briefly in chapter 1, and He comes back here in chapter 2 to give more detail. But the second idea is that Adam wasn't the actual first man. Prehistoric men were here first. Adam was the first man God made to create a nation that would be a reflection of Him on earth. A nation that set His standards for all to follow, and we know that nation would be called Israel. In other words, God made Adam to be the first high priest. This has to be more of the correct answer, because if we go back to Genesis chapter 1, animals were created before man. We're going to see here later in chapter 3 that in this story, animal comes along after man. So really the only way to rationalize this out is that the prehistoric men were born, they lived, they grew, they learned how to work the land, and once they reached a certain point of knowledge, God intervened in His creation, and He created Adam to stand over them and give His laws. Now on to verse 10. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first was the Fishon, and it is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. And the name of the second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. We know 2 of these rivers because they still exist today. The ones we do not know are the Fishon and the Gihon rivers. The Fishon could possibly be several candidates. That includes the Nile River and the Ganges River. Archaeologists have searched for it, and some have claimed to have found it. You can look into Joel Kramer. He has some videos on YouTube if you're interested. Same for the Gihon, which we know was around Ethiopia because the Bible mentions that it was near Cush, and that's where Cush was, around Ethiopia. But there is still no definite conclusion on what waterway was the Gihon. They have both probably dried up over time and not part of any flowing rivers that we have today. But if we take the map of where the rivers could have been, we get an overall idea that the Garden of Eden would have been somewhere around northeastern Turkey or Armenia. Now to verse 15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. God gave Adam one command on what not to do, And with it being in our nature, what do you think soon is about to happen? And by surely die in this passage, keep in mind that God isn't talking about Adam, he's talking about all of mankind. As long as Adam doesn't eat the fruit, he would never die, and neither would the generations after him. Each of us would have kept this close personal relationship with God that Adam had. And now to verse 18. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. So just a couple points here. God again has given us dominion over all creatures. He created us to rule with him. Look at the responsibility he's given Adam by letting him name all the animals. That's how the original deal between God and us was supposed to be, a cooperation. Another thing to pay attention to is, in Genesis chapter 1, God says many times, "And it was good." God created light, and it was good. God created animals, and it was good. God created humans, and it was good. But if you look here at chapter 18, then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone." So this is the first time that we see something not good. So now we move on to chapter 20. The man gave names to all the livestock, and to the birds of the heavens, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was found no helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on the man. And while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of me. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and were not ashamed." One thing to mention here, God is a big fan of marriage. We are to look after one another like he looks after us. He will mention marriage many times as we work our way through the entire Bible. Sex is a gift for a married couple. It is not a sin, but to be enjoyed. The Book of Solomon is dedicated to marriage and making love. So take time for your spouse and make them a high priority. It certainly is godly. So now let's move on to chapter 3. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any other beast in the field that the Lord God had made. Let's pause here and talk a little bit about the serpent and what's coming next. Because what comes next is the most important story in all of our history. Us Christians call it the fall, and it's why it's the title of this video. It is why we live in a sinful world with so much betrayal and worry and death and pain and anger. We were created in God's image to be like him, to be with him, to rule over with him. Sin was not originally in the world, and neither was death. Some churches today say that because of this original designation, we are still God's. But that isn't true at all. We had that chance, but as the story unfolds, we will lose that designation and be cast to the world, and be cast to Satan. The Hebrew word used for the serpent is the word Nahash, which means shining one. This could mean Satan was more of an angel of light that took on the form of a snake. Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 tells us a war broke out in heaven led by Satan, one of the highest ranking angels. Satan was cast down to the earth and his angels and demons with him. This is his chance to get even with God by ruining his creation. In Revelation, Satan is referred to as a dragon. Maybe that's a better visual picture. Also, just a little foreshadowing, Satan wins this battle, but through the death of Jesus on the cross, God will eventually win this war. So now back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. And he said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" Now, if we pay attention, there's an extra rule that's added here, right? God told Adam not to eat from the fruit of the tree of good and evil. But now Eve is saying, "You shall not touch it." This must have been relayed to her by Adam when he told her what God said. Now to verse 4. But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewn fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Okay, so we have a lot to go over here. First, when Satan says, "You surely shall not die," he is right, but only for that moment. Again, when they ate the apple, sin and death at that point were introduced into the world for not only Adam and Eve, but all of us. But the main point I want to touch on here is all through the Bible. Adam is going to be held responsible for this and not Eve. Adam received the instruction from God before the woman was made. Adam knew of this command because God told him directly. But Eve was not there. She didn't know the seriousness like Adam did. This was the fall of humanity, the darkest day in human history, when we lost that close personal relationship with God, when we lost this perfect creation with no sin and pain. A divide occurs between us and God in this moment. So if you ever ask how a good God made such an evil world, here's your answer laid out plainly in the book of Genesis. God did not make a mistake. He gave us a choice, free will, and we brought evil and sin into the world. Think of it this way. Why was the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden? Why would God put it there and say, you cannot eat of it? It was a test to see what they would do. If Adam would have just said no, God eventually may have let them eat from the fruit of the tree. This story is also explained very good in Romans chapter 5, verse 12. It starts with, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world and death through sin, thus death spread to all men. It goes into more detail as you read on. Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees in the garden. But the Lord called to the man, and he said to him, where are you? Of course, God already knew where Adam and Eve were. And this is a question he still asks many of us today. Where are you? We can't escape God. How many of us have tried, right? But this will be our first time to see a different side of God. And this is their chance to come clean. But what do they do instead? They make a very tragic mistake. Genesis chapter 3, verse 10. And he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. They are now self-aware and self-conscious, you can see. In chapter 11, God said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? And the man said, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate. Just a few verses back, Adam was praising Eve, calling her the flesh of my flesh. Now he's throwing her right under the bus. You can start to see it, can't you? Evil creeping into the world. Guilt. Fear. Now to verse 13. Then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. So they're just passing it on down the line, right? Adam blames Eve, Eve blames the serpent. And the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock, and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And to the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Pain in childbearing was her punishment. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to the dust you shall return. God's punishment was from now on, his job of working the land was going to be painful, and he was going to be sore, and sweaty, and hot, and it wasn't going to be fun. That was Adam's punishment. Now to verse 20. The man called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. And the Lord God made for Adam and his wife garments of skin and clothed them. And the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Here's another mention to us, like in chapter 1. This is why we say Jesus was with God from the very beginning in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. This is where the basis of the Trinity comes from. In Genesis chapter 1 and in Genesis chapter 3, we have the mention of us, someone that God is working with. Now, back to verse 22. Now at least he reached out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man. And at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed a cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. What we have here is the story of the original breaking apart between God and man. God left us to the fruit or consequences of what we sowed. He has stayed involved along the way, but from a distance. It will never be the same on this earth until Jesus returns or we get to heaven. Only then are we offered that type of relationship again with our Maker. It is important to ask, though, Where was God, and why did he stop the serpent? He easily could have, but he let it go on. He was in full control and had a plan either way. That backup plan will be the rest of our Bible, and it will be completed when Jesus is nailed to the cross. This was a test of his new creation. Like I said before, that's why the tree was there to begin with. And we know that this was a test from the book of Job, because the book of Job tells us that even Satan answers to God, so it was no secret to God that the serpent was there. Had Adam have obeyed God and just said no, things would have been much different. Does that sound familiar? How many times do we still say today, if I'd only obeyed God, things would have been much different? In our next video, we'll look at how evil spreads from this point on, and we'll look at the story of Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's children. So see you next time on our journey through the book of Genesis.